So we've got our project set up and ready to go. Let's get coding. Now, just to show you what we want to end up doing, what I'm going to show you right now is sort of a simplified version of what you saw at the beginning of the lesson, where you just have one box falling into a world. All right, pretty basic. Now, let's go back to our code. To get this box falling into our world, we basically need to do three things. All right, number one, we need to set up the world. And when I say set up the world, I mean set up this underlying mathematical model that's going to be doing all the physics calculation for us. Once we've done that, step two is going to be creating the walls and the floor. And step three will probably be adding the box. Actually, let's make it a crate, because Lord knows we won't have a good game until we put a crate in it. So to set up the world, let's create a fun little setup world function. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-1, and in Flash Develop, I'm going to get this fun generate function pop-up. If I select that, it creates the little outline of the function for me. Saves you a little typing. Now, we're going to need to do three things to set up this world. First is we're going to need to set up the size of the universe. Second, we're going to need to define gravity. And the third thing we're going to need to do is tell the world whether to ignore sleeping objects. But before we do that, maybe it's time to give you a little crash course in a couple of the classes we're going to be encountering in Box2D. So it's back to the PowerPoint. The first class you're going to run into is this thing called the B2AABB class. And according to the source code, B2AABB is a manifold for two touching convex shapes. I don't really know what that means, but basically you can kind of think of it as a rectangle. There's a few differences. All right, you got your rectangle in Flash, and you define that by the x and y coordinate of the top left corner, the width, and the height. In Box2D, this B2AABB object is defined by the lower bound and the upper bound. And the lower bound is basically a point that's associated with the upper left of the rectangle, and the upper bound is a point associated with the bottom right of the rectangle. The rectangle class in Flash has lots of fun little methods. You can use a contains point, union between another rectangle, calculate the height, all sorts of stuff. So it's kind of a useful class. B2AABB is actually kind of less useful. It really only lets you do a couple things: get the lower bound and the upper bound, get those points that you set, and it's got sort of this boring is-valid method to make sure the lower bound really is up and to the left of the upper bound. And yes, I think it's confusing a little bit that I've said the lower bound is to the upper left and the upper bound is to the lower right. Try not to think about that too much. Anyway, you'll find that basically Box2D probably uses this B2AABB in a lot of its calculations. But if you're trying to do fun little rectangle-related math, I'd probably keep using the rectangle class, because it contains a lot of built-in methods you're probably more likely to use. Now, when I told you that lower bound and upper bound were points, I actually lied. They're not quite points, they're something else instead. The B2vec2 class. Now really, this B2vec2 class is a vector in 2 dimensions, which I think maybe if you're mathematically inclined, you can think of as a 1x2 matrix. However, to simplify things and for kind of all intents and purposes, most of the time, you can kind of think of it as a point on steroids. We do not endorse the use of steroids. So looking at the two again, the point in Flash defined by xy, same with this B2vec2. Point has some fun methods. You can add and subtract points. You can calculate the distance between 2 points. You can determine whether 2 points are equal by comparing the x and y values. B2vec2 has a lot of similar methods. It can give you the length of a vector. It can normalize a vector. I think Flash can do this as well with its point. A bunch of extra stuff I don't really get. You know, it basically includes some matrix multiplication functions. I think probably you won't use these, but Box2D uses these a lot. And one function that we are going to be looking at, in fact right now, is the set function, which lets you set the x and y value in one fell swoop. So I believe in Flash there's no way to set the x and y values simultaneously for a point that already exists. You have to say point.x equals whatever, .y equals whatever, In Box2D, this B2 vec2, you just say dot set, and then you can give it both the x and y values. It makes things a little more convenient, which we will look at right now.